Welcome to the Professional Technical Interviewee. I'm Taylor Dorsett. In my 6-year career in technical recruiting, I realized that just about every company does technical interviews differently. Many very good senior engineers do not do well in technical interviews, despite being great developers. The only way to get better at interviewing is to practice. Many early career engineers don't really know what a technical interview is like until they're in their first one. Our goal here is to change that and shed some light on the technical interview. My guest today is Brad Beierman. He's the VP of Engineering at Everspring. We talk about what he looks for during a technical interview, a little intro into system design, and learn about his interviewing horror stories. Hope you enjoy. Hello. How are you, Brad?
Doing well. How you doing today?
Doing well. I guess today is Brad Beierman. He is the Vice President of Technology with Everspring. Before that was with Kapow as the Director of Technology. And I think we've known each other probably since then, maybe a little bit before as well.
Yeah. Hey, the time keeps flying here, but the experience keeps building, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thanks so much for being on. I know obviously we've worked together in the past, even bringing some people on, or even having conversations through doing interviews. And I know you've, especially in the Chicagoland area, probably hired dozens, if not hundreds, of people over the years. So would love to get insights into kind of what that interview process has looked like and how you've developed that strategy over the years, and then also yourself interviewing, how that's gone and probably shifted since you moved from an individual contributor standpoint to more of a director to a VP level role, right?
Yeah, no, that absolutely makes sense because at the end of the day, that's a journey.
Yeah,
that goes on. It's a career journey, right?
absolutely. Could you just give us an intro of Everspring, kind of what you do there and what the team looks like now?
Yeah. So at Everspring, we're in this space called EdTech, short for education technology. And so we work with a lot of top tier universities in bringing their online programs to life, courses and that. But the part where we really play strongly in is what we call online program management, OPM, as the industry knows it. And that is really setting up and this is higher ed, by the way, too. So this is like graduate MBA, things like that. Setting up courses online, the marketing of them, capturing leads, potential students. We even handle student services, student advisory, student success coach, the curriculum, and then the overall degree plan for that. And we handle all the calls for the universities.
Oh,
And
wow.
in fact, when you call into the university, when you call in, it's coming into Everspring, but it shows the university name out there. So we're kind of this white label ghost in the machine, if you will, for that. So anytime a university has something new they would like to offer online as part of maybe an MBA program, a course, most of the universities aren't really set up for that. Doing this online curriculum, the search engine marketing of it, all that. So we handle all that. And so all the technology behind that, as you can imagine, and hosting a lot of that stuff, that falls under kind of the whole realm of what Everspring technology is. And our technology team today, it continues to grow. We are probably sitting somewhere around 18 people, with contractors and that. It's been an interesting year, 2020, for us, like a lot of companies. We've got office downtown, and our head count when we first went out remote for pandemic was considerably less than what it is right now. We've hired 40 people now,
Oh, wow.
and if we were to go back to the office, we wouldn't fit all of them in there. And one of the things that this pandemic has brought for us, as you can imagine, that whole education space has just been turned upside down on its head. As there's no really in classroom things going on there. So this really hits on our sweet spot. So it's been booming for us and very challenging and some long, busy nights.
Yeah. Well, and probably adds a whole new level of complexity for interviewing as well, right? If you've onboarded 40 people throughout a year where, it's tough to meet someone and shake their hand and, really get to know them well, that interviewing remotely, I know, has been a challenge for a lot of people.
It has been, and some of the things that you just take for granted, bringing in a dev candidate, developer or something, or even a systems person.
Mhm.
Hey, let's do a whiteboard exercise. Ooh, whoops, we don't have a whiteboard, do
Yeah.
we? Here. Now there are some online tools for interviewing
Sure.
as such, but they're not completely mouse friendly or touchpad friendly and that. So yeah, it's kind of stretched, I think, a lot of different tools here. And in fact, here just last week, I was on a CTO roundtable with
Mhm.
several other folks here in Chicago. And this was one of the things we had brought up. Tools such as Miro, Jamboard, and other things like that. It's not just interviewing, but it's also our company,
Yeah.
also folks in the business. That's where a lot of communication goes on, and so we've actually piloted different things such as XPen with different software in that. So, but
Sure.
yes, these interviews, that's also part of it too. And so, yep.
Early in 2020 when I was still in recruiting, and there was probably a 4 week period, right when the pandemic hit, that a lot of companies who were only in office and only knew how to interview in office had to shift drastically, right? And really realize, like, what tools do we need? How do these work? Do they work well? And you're kind of evaluating on the fly while trying to do interviews and evaluating individuals. So certainly an interesting time, if nothing else. Uh,
Yeah.
what are you typically looking for? Obviously, it depends on the role, but I guess what are you typically interviewing for when you're interviewing for your team at Everspring?
It varies because we have quite a cross section of technologies we have to do. So
Mhm.
we're, obviously we're polyglottic in different areas. In our one roof, you'll encounter, we do Java, we've got Spring Boot that we're running stuff on, we've
Mhm.
got Python, and there we've got some PHP going on, we've got Scala going on. And so, there's a multi-language facet going on there. We're cloud native and we're in AWS. So a lot of things related to those services we do. Another part that I think makes us a little bit unique too is we have so many different life cycles we go through
Interesting.
in software development, system development, because one part of our business is really waterfall driven.
Mhm.
Another part of it is straight up software development for something like EverCourse or Course Builder, which is a product we have, a SaaS product, and that goes through the agile, incremental type build cycling. We've embraced scaled agile framework with the architectural runway
Mhm.
enablers and that. And then we've also got a hybrid in here with a little bit of waterfall in front end, and then kind of an agile delivery at the end here. And so, and a lot of it is driven by some of the universities are just, it's an older way. Uh,
Sure.
it's a different way, and that's kind of our business started with them too. So it's like we've got to think like the customer, and that, but yet we've got to be a modern shop and do that. So getting that to come together is kind of challenges. So yeah, we've got an infrastructure team, developers, QA. We've got what I call risk management too, where we've got project managers, scrum masters, and things like that. And so in general, that's the makeup. And then we've got kind of a help maintenance desk area too. We
Yeah.
recently got into e-commerce this past year too, which was a new area where we were selling our own courses online. And now we've also partnered with other places, like FireEye, to bring corporate training into and different technologies in that. And so there's a Shopify platform, and
Oh
that we
wow.
brought in for that, which is some new skills we've had to do. And then a large part of our core, I would say, is content management with
Mhm.
Brightspot. We had one that we built on our own, but we've actually been migrating to a content management system. So yeah, just a whole bunch of things going on there.
Interesting. I mean, it seems like someone who would have the capacity to wear lots of hats is probably something that's important, due to just. I mean, it's not a massive team to do what sounds like a lot of different kind of responsibilities.
It is, that's a challenge because we have a more of a shared resource type of
Hmm.
thing going on here. So yeah, you can be wearing multiple hats because at any point the business may go in this direction, say, oh, heavy OPM. oh, now heavy e-commerce. Oh, now we need to go do reports, which is a Tableau
Sure.
type thing, offering that out there. So we've got a lot of pivots and context switching too. And that's something not everybody's good at as a developer, by the way. Somebody comes in full stack. There's always been this debate of a full stack developer. Well, okay, so you know front end, your rear end, back end scripting and that, but usually as somebody has a focus more so on one area than the other.
Yeah.
And we often have to really kind of stretch both, say, okay, we're doing React. We've also got Angular. We've got some Vue. My
Mhm.
gosh, there's three right there in the
Yeah.
house. And so I have to pull somebody that's been doing some Spring Boot and say, okay, well, you're full stack. I'm going to have to put you on a little bit of React over here, and I know you're not real crisp on it and everything, but it's a good exercise. But some folks really want to stay focused on something, so we've got a lot of context switching, and it's challenging because it's a small company, but
Mhm.
it's got a large portfolio. And what would have typically been handled by a larger company, a higher headcount, is now handled by a smaller headcount, very versatile, switching to handle that type of thing. So we're continuing to build on it though, and we leverage contracting, staff aug heavily too. So yeah.
Sure. It might be easier to have some, if you have contractors who are able to focus in on one thing where, this is a contained piece, right, that they can handle. And then your internal folks, you can move around a little bit more when maybe they're, I don't know if creative is the right word, but maybe more adaptive because they understand all the systems better, right?
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
Do you have it sounds like when you're screening for people, it could be challenging, right? Do you have a standardized system to do technicals, or does it change depending on the role and kind of what you're looking for at that moment?
There are some things we do try to standardize on. If it's just straight ahead development, I need somebody to come in and do front end development, or if it's just, hey, I need a good JavaScript, or I'm sorry, a Java developer
Hmm.
uh, to come in. Yeah, we'll do the typical type of coding test. And when I say typical, the usual suspects on that, some type of algorithmic problem to do.
Sure.
Let's do that maybe on the board. Let's maybe even do that online here with
Hmm.
that, and try things up. I don't get too gimmicky with that. FISBA, the FISBA test. To, um, I want something that's a little bit more practical along those lines. But I'll also ask questions, even no matter where somebody's at in their development career,
Hmm.
whether they're still fairly green out of, and we've had folks come in from boot camps
Hmm.
too, who have moved on and been successful in this environment. I'll have folks in their early part also get to know some of the systems pieces too. And obviously, as a more senior developer, I expect that as well. And somebody that's a lead or a principal. So I'll start sprinkling in some systems related questions too, because coming in the door, um, when we learn our development on a framework, let's say like a Ruby on Rails
Hmm.
type of thing, I think for a lot of folks, they learn how to do it, and spin up a virtual machine and start running that environment on there. Well, a lot of it has gone to containers, and so now having a container for a local environment and being able to deploy that out there through some type of magical cloud engineering, it goes out there and voila, it works
Sure.
type of thing. Well, what is going on there? And they're going to be in discussions with other folks here that may be referring to, yeah, we've got a couple of EC2s running, T3 sized, and we have to, take in consideration, Terraform, because we're doing all that to help coordinate a lot of things that are going on here. We'll hear these names such as Terraform, Ansible, Chef, Puppet. What is that?
Yeah.
And so I'll start asking about. I'm not expecting anybody to be an expert, but I always encourage folks to start to get knowing what that is early on. In fact, when you go to learn a framework like Rails, will stay on that one. If you establish something and AWS to store your your assets. If you're going to go out there and run it on like Heroku,
Hmm.
you'll want to get an S3 set up in AWS. So where are you keeping your image files and stuff like that if you want to run that out there? And so just knowing things like that, what is S3? And I'll ask a question like that. And some folks will say, oh, that's storing stuff. So that must be a database. It's like, well, not necessarily. Or some people say, well, I think that's really just a gigantic drive that it's stored on. And they'll kind of have that tone. But no, let's find out really what that is and talk about that because it's file storage.
Hmm.
Okay. S3 is probably perhaps the most used thing out there in AWS, and you as a developer coming in, and you go to publish something out there that's live, where's that being stored at? And S3 is where it goes. And so it doesn't follow a folder structure, like you would say, everything in it is used as really an object. And in place of using a hierarchical directory, like you would expect on a drive,
Yeah.
S3 stores files really in a flat organization of containers. And those
Interesting.
containers are called buckets. Yeah. And so inherently, just by using S3, you're already using containers. You just might not know it in
Yeah.
there. So there's a good starting place right there.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think a lot of maybe a lot of companies or maybe even individuals think, when you go from being early career, mid-level to a senior developer, you're expected to know that stuff, but there's not really a clear path to when do you learn that stuff, right? It's just great. Now I'm a senior developer and someone asked me, can I spin up this S3 bucket, right? And do I know how to do that or not, right? And I think that has to come from, like you're saying, early career, either being interested in and doing your own research, or having a team or a manager who's saying this is something that you may not know about it now, but it's something that you should start looking into and kind of helping them get into that a little bit more, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And um, I have developers that are more at junior level who, yeah, I'm expecting them already to use Lambda because
Mhm.
that's part of what we've got in our system right there. So just because you're, more at that early part of curve of your development, yeah, you still need to know where stuff is running. And, tell me about Lambda. It's this service that allows, the user to really run code without a server. Okay. And, tell me a little bit more about that. How's that kind of work? And you're really kind of only paying for the compute time. It's really no need to charge when things are not running, when your code is not running. So it's this nice thing that you can kind of tap into. And, it supports code written in Node, Java, Python, and other languages that really kind of supported by Amazon's Linux. And so that's a key piece. So S3, Lambda. I mentioned EC2
Mhm.
earlier. Amazon's Elastic Compute Cloud. It's affectionately abbreviated EC2. All right. There's a whole lingo that really goes around that, around sizing and that. And so this whole lexicon of AWS, S3, EC2, Lambda, Glacier, Amazon SNS, CloudFront. What else I got here? EBS, which is Elastic Block Store, Kinesis. Some of these things you're not going to pick up, and like necessarily in the day of boot camp. So where do I pick that up? And where
Yeah.
I often take a junior is let's learn the basics. Let's learn where the server is and tell me what are different types of databases you've
Hmm.
got out there, because these names that we're encountering from AWS is really a brand name for some
Right.
of this concept we already know about, or at least I would expect people to know about them, but that's not always a given. They need to learn some of these things. So there's where a dialogue starts in an interview for me.
Yeah.
And I'll start asking them, hey, how would you go about picking out a database? That's a real simple question, but sometimes that gets into a PhD answer.
Sure. Yeah.
Um,
Absolutely. What's interesting, I mean, as you described kind of what like how that process, or kind of you're leading people towards that. I'm thinking back, like as an early career individual myself, I realize sometimes when we're talking about anything in the cloud or anything server related for my own work, it's very easy for me to go, okay, well, we use DigitalOcean right now. So, okay, well, once we start touching DigitalOcean stuff, my eyes can kind of glaze over, right? And then it's a bunch of magic that happens, and like I'm following along, right? And I want to learn, so I'm paying attention. But I can see how it's very easy to go, well, that's the senior individual's job, right? Like someone else knows how to do that magic, and they'll make sure that it gets done. And then all of a sudden something's live, right? Instead of I just get it up to a certain point, right? So I think there has to be that interest, right? Apart from showing that interest and kind of asking about it, do you see another way or have advice for people who are early career who want to learn more about that?
It's one of these things where you just got to dig in to it. And I go back to some of the more basic things in computer science. Learn about cache. What's difference between, there's different types. We've got application cache, distributed, global. Global's the most used here.
Mm-hmm.
Principles such as what's replication. So transactional, merged, those types of things. Some of them can be synchronous or asynchronous replication. Redundancy is a big thing out there, because when you set up your architecture in AWS, we want to make sure there's failover in that. So yeah, those terms, cache, replication, redundancy, proxy, what's an index, and then what's an app server, what's load balancing, right? Then, because what you'll end up finding right after you kind of learn those principles is you go over to the AWS world and you'll find out that, oh, there's Elastic Beanstalk. Oh, that's just really this over here. A an app server. Oh, that's EC2. That's what they refer to as EC2. But still learn about what an app server, how that works, because there's about three different, there's several different flavors they come in. You can have single thread, single process, multi-thread, single process, multi-process, single thread. There's different flavors of that. For those who have been, I'll go back to the Rails framework, because I think a lot of people that's where they learn. I think a lot of the boot camps and that. So you'll see Puma come up, or Fusion Passenger. And what kind of server is that? Is that multi-thread? Is that multi-process? Or is it a hybrid, a mix of both? So I'll ask questions around that. And, oh, we're running on AWS EC2. Which one do you think we're using? And they'll say, well, it's AWS's server. But truth be known, they have a contract with Passenger. So they're running Passengers hybrid. I tend to say, okay, cool. That's perfect. Good to know that, because you've got Passenger running locally on your laptop, but what's out there in space running?
Yeah.
And know about that. And then you could start to go into a dialogue. Well, let's talk about the global interpreter lock on that, the Go, and how that thing works and stuff with high throughputs and stuff like that. So that gets a little bit more complicated, but just having an awareness of, I think, some of those basic foundational computer science terms.
Yeah.
Right there, load balancing. What is that? How's that work?
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like understand the concepts, and then you'll realize. I mean, I think this is common in a lot of the world of software development. Is like if you understand the concept well, when you switch into a new language or new framework or whatever it is, you realize, oh, this is that same thing just with a different name, right? Or a little slightly different flavor, right? Okay,
That's
so
a
that's
good
interesting.
analogy. Yeah, that's a good comparison right there. We were talking databases earlier, how to select one of those. One of the questions I ask a developer is, hey, tell me about CAP theorem. What is that? How do you use that? That sounds like something straight out of a CS book, and it's going to be on the test. Like, Avogadro's number out of chemistry or
Sure.
something. It's really not. It's, some people like using that as a rule of thumb. It's an abbreviation for consistency, availability, and then partitioning tolerance, CAP.
Yeah.
And you're picking 2 out of 3 of that. And so, somebody tells me that, well, I would pick a relational database, relational database management system, or DBMS. Well, though it has consistency and availability, but not necessarily friendly at partitioning.
Yeah.
And so there's where they're starting to use that. So they'll say, well, MySQL, Postgres, those are good examples of that. If they want to head to the bonus round on an interview question, at that level, well, give me an example of something that's high availability with partitioning tolerance with that. And, now they'll start thinking about NoSQL. So it's SQL database versus a NoSQL database, where it's not just, SQL is kind of more tables, columns type of thing. And these others, you can ultimately have, key value, column oriented, document oriented. You start hearing these other names such as, MongoDB, Cassandra, Redis, and that's how you start to get familiar. Those are brand names right there, but you're really looking at just a particular type of, it's a NoSQL database. And that's what would be a basic, computer science piece right there. So back to the question, how do you pick something out? What's kind of those criteria?
Yeah.
Right there, and just basic fundamental thing right there. But now when you want to start benchmarking these databases to each other, well, what's the difference really between Mongo and Cassandra? Okay, I wouldn't expect somebody that's still a little bit more junior to do it, but they should be able to tell me that's a NoSQL database. Well, what's the difference between that and Postgres? Well, Postgres is a relational database, and there's a difference. That's a fair question.
Yeah.
I think, just know what that is, because you're going to hear those when you come in the door. So don't stay in the dark for too long.
Yeah, sure. Would you say that's closer to a systems design interview than what a lot of people would think of as a pure, coding interview or technical interview?
Good question. Where is the dividing line on that? Because if I was to go into a systems type interview, we're going to start getting in the weeds a little bit.
Yeah.
Here and that. And what does in the weeds look like? That gets into an area that is, I will say, of constant change out there with cloud engineering. And, going into some of the most intermediate areas, I would be taking a look at, what are the types of load balancers in EC2? And there's, typically 3 types there. You're going to have one that's an app load balancer, one for network, and then one that's, like a classic. And then, explain to me a T2 instance that's compute optimized versus memory optimized. Where would I shift on those, and how would I measure that? And somebody would probably say, well, I probably want to start looking at load balancing, or not load balancing, but probably some type of capacity around that to find out, where does it break, and using a tool like Gatling, how much traffic can that take, and how do you know if you scale vertically as opposed to horizontally? Vertically is more capacity in the actual machine instance, the Xenon processor having more power. That's more of a vertical thing. As to horizontal is, well, let's get more of those, okay, and just more instance of it. And there's where AWS and those companies make a lot of their strength, and so there's a system thing. And then we're going back to this discussion of containers. There's a whole nother world right there. And for a system design or a system type of level, let's talk about an orchestrator for containers. And so I would automatically expect them to know how to work Docker image. And if they've used Swarm, that's fair too. But a lot of it has moved into AWS, which is their ECS service.
Yeah.
Get a drink of water here. But that whole notion of orchestration,
Hmm.
you start to get in this dialogue about Kubernetes. And Kubernetes is, I'll start to ask people about, tell me how you set that up and how do you work that, and how often do you bake something
Hmm.
out there, and working with different types of key pairs in AWS, and then working in different services there, because we've got a new paradigm here that has really emerged in more recent years here, which has become affectionately known as this infrastructure as code,
Sure.
which almost comes full circle because now you're talking about developing with infrastructure.
Yeah.
And so for something that's a fundamental function just out there running on a Lambda,
Hmm.
I'd like to take that and integrate that with several others, which are just, chunks of code running a function that's out there real simplistically, and tie those together. Well, how do I synchronize all those together? There's where orchestration comes in Kubernetes.
Yeah.
So how you deploy something like that in a pipeline, there's more of a system discussion. And then I think the other part of the discussion, this is probably me more my level of, you know, vice president of technology, having known a budget, I got to watch out for the AWS bill. How do we manage that? And so there's a set of tools that I'll ask them about that's in AWS that's commonly used, CloudWatch and things like
Hmm.
that. And there's all kinds of different aftermarket, I would say, third-party tools to help you manage your budget, and all kinds of different names, forum fun names. Uh, I remember somebody was making fun of that, and saying, "Oh yeah, you could get cloud budget, cloud dollars, cloud nachos, whatever you want to call it." But
Cloud beer money, right?
yeah, exactly. Uh, but that becomes key when you start becoming, not only a lead developer, but a principal
Hmm.
developer is working with that, and an architect, a cloud architect. What does that monthly bill start to look like, and how do I optimize that? And now you're going to have a discussion with developers,
Sure.
and hey, what are these payloads that we've got going on, and how can we minimize that, and do different things? So kind of a whole different type of interview, but yet there is a part that does come full circle there. And I would say where these two worlds really meet heavily is deployment.
Hmm. Yeah. Interesting. Well, I typically ask people how they think they do in technical interviews. I'm assuming, though, it's been a little while since you've probably whiteboarded for in a job interview, right? But it seems like this type of thing is probably something you'd be more likely to be asked about, right? Like, how would you design a system? But when you were doing technicals, like, how did you feel? Do you feel like you were good at technical interviews, like your standard whiteboarding or algorithm problem in the past?
That's an interesting thing to. I think I never really consider myself good at any of these things here. I'm good at constantly learning how much I don't know,
Sure.
and it keeps me humble. But it's, what do I need to know to do the job?
Hmm.
What do I know to be productive
Yeah.
at the end of the day here? And my experience, I think, over the years has not only been, you know, getting through the interview myself, but I have also found there's people who are good at these technical interviews at giving them, and there's
Hmm.
people who are not good at giving them either.
Sure.
Some people will really go off into the deep end, and what does the deep end look like? There's different parts of a language. In Java, we've got this nice thing called enum.
Hmm.
Java people know what that is. Over in Ruby, nope, you guys create that. And now you've got, the kind of these factions here. Is like, oh, our language has that. You got to go over and create that. But I get it.
Yeah.
So you'll find some interviewers really hone in on it, on that type of thing right there. And okay, that's cool. We can go into that, because when I go to solve something on the board or on the terminal, am I going to use that type of feature? Am I going to
Hmm.
create that right there? And it's always important, no matter what kind of interview, if it's a software interview or a systems interview, I tend to always focus on what are the requirements right there,
Yeah.
because equate this to being a golfer or an archer. You can be the best archer, the best golfer, but if the target keeps moving, the flag keeps moving, you're never going to hit it. Or if you just got your eyes closed and just take a swing or a release at it, you won't do it. And what I'm trying to say there, it's the requirements, knowing where you're trying to aim,
Yeah.
where you got to hit. And so when I interview, I like to ask questions. When I'm being interviewed, I like to ask questions
Yeah.
back for it. And it gives a lot of insight as to how somebody thinks.
Hmm.
And it also gives a lot of insight as to who you might be working for, too.
Sure.
It's a two-way street. And I find a lot of developers don't often think about that. They're really concerned about, am I going to be able to get this problem right? Because there's times somebody gave me a coding test and I couldn't get through it.
Hmm.
I asked a lot of questions. We had a heck of a dialogue going on, and they ended up hiring me anyway.
Yeah.
Because I love where you were going. It would have helped me get out of a jam. Like, oh, okay, cool. I couldn't get through your problem, but I think given enough time, I probably could have figured it out. And so that happens too. And that's cool. That's somebody really on the other side, the manager showing a lot of things there. And that is not only flexibility,
Hmm.
but seeing potential and be able to grow you and listen and work through a problem. Because no matter what level, this is somebody that's an experienced manager, they'll recognize that, hey, requirements is still a challenge at any level.
Yeah.
It's not always clear at times, and it's one of the biggest bugaboos for us. And so, get somebody that's good at that. And that I've been in coding interviews where it was just somebody who was just they wanted a heads down developer, and they want somebody that boom knows those libraries
Hmm.
like that and knows all the common patterns like that. I might not know them all and
Yeah.
everything. Coding is an everyday thing. If you're a developer and that is your job, you write code every day. It's
Hmm.
like a musician that has to practice their instrument every day. Write something even on the weekend. Write something after you get off work even.
Yeah.
And it's practice. You get good. Repetition is mastery with it. So it's it's that's a piece. That's kind of a long answer to a short question you asked, but hopefully it gives you some idea about where that goes.
No, that's helpful. I mean, and typically, or my follow-up question was going to be if you have a system that you use to break down technical interview questions, especially if, you hear one and you go, I have no idea, right? Or I have a starting point and I have no idea how to get to the end, right? But it sounds like the important things for you is one, making sure you actually understand, like clarifying the question,
Yeah.
clarifying exactly what the requirements are, right? And then two, talking through it and asking questions throughout. I think one of the things I've seen throughout the years is people who they get a question, they go, okay, and then they're silent and they stare at the board and then they'll start writing. But as an interviewer, you have no idea what's going on inside their head, right? And they might be going on the right path, they might not be, but you have no clue unless they're verbalizing it, right? So
Yeah.
apart from obviously clarifying and asking questions and talking throughout, are there other things that you would use to break down an interview question or break down a systems design question?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And this is, part of the experience of having been an architect
Hmm.
for a number of years too. Once upon a time, I taught courses on UML.
Hmm.
This is for those not real familiar, unified modeling language, which is an architectural language used in software that is, came from OMT, Booch, Jakobson. A lot of these guys put this language together. So for myself, it's diagrammatically capturing something into a conceptual diagram with real terms, and real terms being real world terms, not a computer term, such as, okay, plane, airport, passenger. Those are real terms right there, as opposed to, object, plane. That's more of a computer science term. So I'll try to get it in a real world presentation like that and say, And ultimately where I try to go in an interview is a use case diagram.
Interesting.
Use case diagram shows who are the users of this, and then what are the use cases we get there, because identification of use cases, consider it stories that we get in Agile, that's a key skill right there. And so if somebody's describing the problem to you, start thinking in terms of stories and use cases. So when for somebody does that, I'll start writing those down. If I'm on a whiteboard, I'll start writing those down right up there. I say, okay, so here's the stories I'm thinking of. Here's the use cases right here. And then tell me about who all is using this. And if it's just one person, I'll tie it in with where it's at. And some of those use cases might have an extends or an includes on it for those familiar with UML. I'll diagram that up there. Maybe I'll even do a sequence diagram to show for the lifeline, if you're familiar with sequence diagrams, showing the actor, then the lifelines of each method or object and how they interact with each other, with the arrows showing the connectivity and what comes back for a return or something like that. Done that, that right there is a more formal way of doing it, because what I have found is there's been something kind of lost here in the industry. It happened really after really we went heavily into Agile, where in the waterfall, where we spent all this time on design, and we would spend time diagramming thing. And now we've got frameworks that help us out quick. We've got short iterations of things where we don't have to do that, and I could put something out quickly. And that's so I found folks have not really held on to the diagramming skills. If I ask somebody to go to the board and diagram something, they'll start drawing some boxes with lines connecting them. And then I'll turn around and ask somebody else, can you interpret what was just drawn if you haven't seen it? And if they can't explain, it's a real issue.
Sure.
For us out there. So being able to diagrammatically express the problem is a big one out there, because if you can't visualize it, you probably can't solve it.
Yeah.
If you can't visualize a bug, you probably can't fix it.
Yeah.
Everything. We're visual thinkers, and it kind of goes back to what we started about on the on this particular discussion here about whiteboarding. That's a tough thing here for interviews. Is I want to be able to do that. So when I go for a coding test in this type of environment, I would be asking, is there something I will be able to diagram on? Or is there something I will be able to draw on? And you know what? Somebody interviewing you, they'll appreciate that. And they'll immediately key something in their minds like, oh, this person gets it. Yeah, this person wants to think out loud about it. And if somebody says, no, we don't have it, we're just going to go right to code, I would be a buyer beware what you might be stepping into there.
Sure. I hear you. And there's ways to do pseudocoding as well. I mean, that sounds a little bit more involved if you have an actual use case, right? But if you just have here's our input, here's what you need to make the output be, right? There's ways to do pseudocoding that's much more descriptive as well, that I think is often a lost thing, especially for early career people who may not think a lot about it. Like you can really outline the entire problem, and then the actual coding part of it's fairly simple, right? You're just kind of wiring up the pieces, right? But you can name everything and really tab everything correctly, which I think is something that people often overlook the value of. And similar to what you're talking about, diagramming something, they maybe undervalue how useful that can be. One, to get your thoughts out there, but two, to have the other people following along, right? Because I'm sure if you're diagramming something and you're completely off, your interviewer might go, have you thought about how this might come in, right? They're going to give you input rather than just, you're off to the races and maybe going down a path that isn't fruitful, right?
Pseudo is definitely has its place in these interviews, and there's a sequence or an order of where you start hitting pseudo. I've always felt, and that's first step one. Be sure you understand the problem. So there's your questions going back and forth. Step two, visualize it. There's your diagramming. There's your mental image. Mm-hmm. Step three, starting to think structurally about the control flow of something that would be in the program. So, there's our if, then, else, switch, all these key words that are in, a lot of these languages. Mm-hmm. we'll start thinking about that. But that's, you've already came through quite a path to
Yeah.
get there with that. And I've had folks that I've interviewed with, and very first thing they'll draw up there, believe it or not, is the word if with a squiggly line right by it, and then a closing bracket. And oh boy, let's see where they go with this. Nothing wrong with that. If you can pound it out like that, that's cool. I have actually seen people do it,
Yeah.
which makes me think what's going on in their head, because you had to decompose it to get there. If you're really starting right there, you're having to work your way backwards to figure it out. And so getting to pseudo is somewhere farther down that thought of thinking right there.
Yeah.
Starting off with it right off the bat, whoops, no, unless somebody's being very specific on there and saying, I want to see some control flow right off the bat. How would you loop
Yeah.
through that? And that's somebody already calling out, all right, he or she already said loop. I already know what that's going to look like, and they want to see some code right now. Okay. And here I go. I would go back to buyer beware of some manager, somebody's asking you for that. Are they really going to hire somebody that really focuses on breaking those problems down like that? They make mistakes too, by the way. They'll have a bad hire, and
Sure.
it's their interview process. So this is a two-way street. So for those who are in these things, always keep that in mind, because there's no shortage of, they say there's no shortage of bad programmers. There's no shortage of bad interviewers too.
Sure. I agree with that. Through my time in recruiting, I would say it'd be lucky if it was a 50-50 split of good interviewers and bad interviewers. Or maybe I should just say experienced interviewers and, inexperienced interviewers.
Yeah.
I want to be mindful of your time. Do you have any maybe different advice or specific advice for folks who might be early career, who are going into technical interviews or even their first systems design interview, and they're terrified?
Yeah, it's that's a good one, because relaxing, breathe. Because when we're really stressed out or something, it's already tense going into one of these things for some folks, because there's interview anxiety that goes on. And, and I keep pointing at the interviewer, by the way, they're nervous too at times.
Sure.
They're nervous too, because I've found some of these folks that are asking that question, they might be a substitute for somebody else that was supposed to be interviewing you, and they might not actually know the answer, which would be an unveiling thing. But always keep that in mind. This is a dialogue. This is a casual conversation. You're not being just measured on code either. You're being measured in your presence, your character, your ability to be ask questions and know it's okay to say if you don't know something here. It's okay if you're not able to get through the problem. And that, bear in mind, people get hired not being able to get all the way through the problem. People get hired by their approach, by their demeanor. It's the business is people. And when people do well, generally the business does well. And so it's, as a manager, you're looking for, similar to a customer, there's only two things they buy, solutions to problems and good feelings. And good feelings come from trust and credibility. And that's what you're there to do, is to build that trust and credibility. So asking the questions, asking somebody to repeat something, but too, by the way, there's a little trick I've seen people to do, is there's a saying that if you want to know who's in control of the conversation, it's the one who's usually asking all the questions. So if you want to take control of the conversation, but if you ask them a question back, could you clarify that for me? And I'll give you a little bit of time to think. Could you repeat that? I'm not really sure if I've quite heard that right. Give you a little bit of time to think on that if you're really feeling under pressure, and relax on that. I think you're probably going to find you're going to encounter common problems that are out there. Almost, there's a lot of folks, I think you and I were kind of briefly discussing a matrix problem sometimes comes up. That's a good one, because you have to recognize that the code is glue. It's really just glue bringing data to the front, bringing front back to the data storage, everything. You're transporting stuff. And that's what that code is doing a lot of times. It's very rare we actually have something hard coded in there, just adding 5 plus 6 equals Y.
Yeah.
No, it's going to be something that's transporting N plus Z equals something here in parentheses carried into this method, which is now going to feed into here, run. And that's what it's going to be. You're just transporting stuff. So you're having a discussion about glue. And yeah, there'll probably be some questions, some specific things about the language, because you may want to ask, describe for me this part of the language. And we could come up with all kinds of examples here. One of Python, really PHP, pick one out. They come and go. There's actually tens of thousands of languages, because you have to consider one of the things that when you go through computer science is write a compiler.
Sure.
Some folks, I'm going to create a language right here and put that out. It's a real simplistic thing. So yeah, that's where that comes about. So yeah, there's where to do it. Just it's a relaxation thing. And again, these are human beings. They're human too, and they want to succeed in the interview. They don't want to look like a fool either, by the way, too. And that's happened at points where I've seen people who come in are really good at the code. They're asking the interview, and the interviewer doesn't quite know. And the interviewer said, "Boy, I'd love to hire you."
Well,
the
that's
guy
the
in
thing.
the interview turns around and says, "I'm not so sure if you meet my standard.
Yeah.
I'm going with this other company."
I always tell people that's what you need to keep in mind going into an interview is they want it to be successful as well, right? If you check all the boxes and you're the person they want to hire, you've just saved them a lot of time and a lot of future interviews, right?
Exactly.
Yeah. And always writing questions down. You mentioned like there's you tend to see the same types of questions, especially early career. I realized in a lot of my interviews, I was getting one version of probably 5 different questions, basically. There's some variation on that same type of question, but it was very often the same thing. And about the third time I messed up the same question, I went, all right, maybe I'm going to spend some time, write it down and actually solve it in a couple different ways. So next time it comes up, I can breeze right through it. And that also helps with the nerves a lot. If you feel, at least if you've seen the question before, usually you can get the solution right, or get close to something right.
As you go from interview to interview to company, you'll find out they don't follow the dry principle.
Yeah.
They'll repeat the same problem.
Oh yeah. Yep. Well, last question here. Do you have any personal technical interview horror stories or anything maybe early career where you were just in a situation where everything went belly up that you're willing to share?
Oh boy, you're really wanting to dig in here, aren't you?
Have to humble you before the end, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah. I've had some. I've had some real nightmare scenarios actually come up, and it's been a number of years. But yeah, I recall somebody I did, and this was kind of a whiteboard interview with 3 people, and all 3 of them had their feet propped up on the desk, and one person didn't have any shoes on, barefoot.
Wow.
Yeah, that was me. I was still kind of taken back. I thought, what kind of culture am I coming in here? And that's pretty relaxed. And as I soon started to realize that they had been to a company outing, and all 3 of them were highly intoxicated.
Yikes.
And one of them, and not everybody gets intoxicated the same way. You have people that become what do we call a happy drunk, and some people are a little bit more aggressive. Well, I was lucky enough to get 3 aggressives. I thought I was going to get my ass kicked by asking a question. My goodness sake! So I ended up almost ending that interview early myself, just by almost intentionally doing bad. It's like, okay, I really don't know if I know this. Okay,
Yeah.
Is there anything else? Like, boy, Jack Daniels is here interviewing me, and Jack and I aren't getting along.
Well, I like to ask people that because it's good to know that it could always be worse, right? If you have a terrible interview and you feel like you didn't solve the problem, at least there wasn't 3 drunk assholes, berating you while you're trying to whiteboard, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, thank you so much, Brad. I really appreciate you coming on and sharing the knowledge you have. Anything else you'd like to add or anything you'd like to plug here at the end?
Have a happy holiday. Stay safe, stay healthy, and looking forward to canceling my subscription to 2020 and get my new subscription to 2021. Hope for a better year, and hope all goes well for you.
Absolutely. Well, thank you so much. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed the show, please subscribe on YouTube or your favorite podcasting app at The Professional Technical Interviewee. I want to thank my guest and my wonderful editor and producer, Dustin Bays. If you're interested in sharing your technical interview advice and being on the show, please reach out at dorsetttaylordev@gmail.com. Until next time, keep practicing.